I don't shake hands with your kind. She didn't flinch, just slid one folder across the table. $3 billion in pending transfers. Her signature the only thing keeping this company alive. The board laughed. The leather chairs creaked. No one in that room knew they had already lost. The presentation had been perfect. Every number clean. Every projection sharp. Althea Rowan had spent 11 days building that deck. And it showed. The screen behind her glowed with quiet confidence revenue models, risk assessments, 5-year forecasts laid out like architecture. Solid. Undeniable. She clicked the final slide, set the remote down, turned to face the room. 12 men, 1 woman, all of them in chairs that cost more than most people's monthly rent. The afternoon light came through the tall windows in long, pale strips, cutting across the table like something deliberate. Althea extended her hand toward the head of the table. Standard, professional. The way it was always done. Richard Whitlock didn't move. He leaned back instead. Slow, comfortable. The kind of slow that meant he had nowhere to be and no one who could make him hurry. He looked at her hand the way a man looks at something left on the sidewalk, not with anger, just with the particular disinterest of someone who has never had to pretend. I don't shake hands with your kind. The words landed without heat. That was the thing about them. There was no rage in his voice, no edge. He said it the way you'd read a line off a menu, flat, final. For a moment, the room held its breath. Then someone laughed. Low. Almost reflexive the way people laugh when they're not sure if something is a joke, but don't want to be the last one to react. Then another. Then the sound spread, soft and layered, moving around the table like a current. No one stood up. No one said a word in her direction. Elaine Mercer, the only other woman in the room, looked down at her notepad. Her pen moved. She wasn't writing anything. Althea could tell. Althea's hand stayed exactly where it was. She didn't pull it back, didn't drop it, didn't adjust her posture or soften her expression. She let the moment breathe 1 second, 2, 3, while the laughter settled, and the room rearranged itself around its own discomfort. 4 seconds. 5. Then, slowly. She lowered her arm. The movement was unhurried, controlled the way a surgeon is controlled not because of calm, but because of discipline. She smoothed the front of her jacket once, turned back toward her materials on the table, picked up her portfolio with both hands. The screen behind her still glowed. The numbers still floated there, patient and precise. All that work, all those hours, still present, still accurate and completely irrelevant to everything that had just happened in this room. Whitlock reached for his coffee. The ceramic clicked against the table when he set it back down. That small sound filled the silence where her response was supposed to go. Good effort, he said, not looking at her. We'll be in touch. Around the table, folders closed, phones reappeared. One man near the window leaned over to say something to the man beside him. They didn't bother lowering their voices much. Althea gathered her things. She did it without rushing. Stacked each document carefully. Slid the portfolio closed. Pulled the drive from the presentation port, every motion deliberate, every motion witnessed. She walked toward the door. Her heels were quiet on the carpet. The room had already moved on small conversations starting up, chairs shifting, the sound of a normal afternoon resuming as if the last 40 minutes had been nothing more than a brief interruption. She reached the door, pushed it open. In the hallway. The air was cooler. The carpet here was a different shade darker, more worn. The kind of hallway that existed purely to move people between rooms that mattered. She stopped. Not for long. Just a breath. Her phone was in her jacket pocket. She didn't reach for it. She stood still for a moment, facing the far wall, where a large oil painting hung in a heavy frame, a landscape, mountains, something meant to suggest permanence and authority. She looked at it for exactly 3 seconds. Then she walked toward the elevator, behind her, through the closed boardroom door. She could still hear them. Whitlock's voice, carrying easily, the way voices do when they belong to men who have never needed to lower them. The elevator arrived. The doors opened. She stepped inside, and as they closed, she caught a brief reflection of herself in the polished metal composed, upright, unreadable. Her portfolio was tucked under her left arm. Her right hand, the one Whitlock had refused, rested at her side, slightly open. Still open, like she was still waiting for something, or like she already knew it was coming. The door closed behind her, and just like that, she was gone. The room exhaled. Whitlock reached for his coffee again, took a slow sip, set it down. The ceramic made the same small sound as before, precise, unhurried, the sound of a man who had done this 10,000 times and expected to do it 10,000 more. "Next item?" he said. That was all. No discussion, no acknowledgement of what had just happened. The words landed like a gavel, and the room responded accordingly. Folders opened, papers shifted. 3 men near the center of the table leaned forward at the same time, instinctively, the way people move when they've learned that hesitation has a cost. This was how it worked here. Not through shouting, not through visible cruelty, through rhythm, through the steady, practiced efficiency of men who had spent decades building a system that ran on their convenience and called it merit. Elaine Mercer cleared her throat. She was seated 4 chairs down from Whitlock, close enough to matter, far enough to know her position. Her jacket was pressed. Her notes were organized. She had been in this room for 11 years, and she had learned, slowly and without anyone saying it directly, exactly how much space she was allowed to occupy. "I do think," she began, her voice measured, careful, "that the presentation raised some valid points about the Q3 allocation. Perhaps we could—" "Elaine!" Whitlock didn't look up from his folder. She stopped. "We're moving on." A pause. Brief. The kind of pause that wasn't really a pause, it was a door closing. "Of course," she said, and wrote something in her notepad that no one would ever read. Across the table, Marcus Kessler was already on his phone. He was the youngest board member by 14 years, which meant he'd been brought in to modernize the optics without disrupting the structure. He had learned the role quickly. He typed with both thumbs, not looking up, contributing to the meeting by simply existing in it. 2 seats down, Gerald Foss was signing something. He signed things often in these meetings approvals, redirections, quiet decisions that rarely made it into formal minutes. He had a particular way of signing, fast and without reading, that communicated everything about how this room made its decisions. This was the machine, not dramatic, not loud, just efficient in the way that old systems are efficient, because everyone inside them has already accepted the rules, and no one outside them has been given a seat long enough to change anything. Whitlock turned a page. "The Hargrove contract," he said. "Where are we?" A man named Patterson answered from the far end of the table. Numbers, timelines, the language of business moving forward, always forward, the present already becoming the past before anyone had time to examine it. Whitlock nodded twice. Made a note. That nod meant yes, or proceed, or I've already decided. It was hard to tell, and that ambiguity was intentional. kept people working harder than necessary, trying to interpret what had already been determined before they walked in. That was the other thing about this room. The decisions were never made here. They were announced here. There was a difference, and everyone knew it, and no one said it. Elaine tried once more, quietly. A small redirect suggesting that the subcommittee review include an external assessment. It was reasonable. It was professionally worded. It was the kind of suggestion that, coming from Foss or Patterson, would have been written down and acted upon. Whitlock let the sentence finish, then continued as if she hadn't spoken. The meeting moved on, outside in the hallway, somewhere beyond the heavy door. A phone buzzed once against a hard surface, faint, distant. None of them paid attention to it. But Patterson glanced up, just for a second. His eyes moved toward the door, then back to his papers. A small thing. The kind of thing you wouldn't notice unless you were looking for it. He was... Later, 30 minutes after the meeting ended. After the handshakes and the small talk and the elevator rides down, Patterson sat alone in his office on the 14th floor. The city spread out behind him through a wide window, gray and familiar. His phone was on the desk. He looked at it for a long moment without touching it. Then he picked it up and dialed. It rang twice. "She left the building," he said. A pause. "Yes, clean." He ended the call, set the phone face down on the desk, outside his window, 30 floors below. A black car pulled away from the curb. Smooth, unhurried, moving in the direction Althea Rowan had gone. She didn't cry. That was the first thing Whitlock noticed. Not consciously, he wouldn't have admitted to noticing anything about her at all, but somewhere behind his practiced indifference, something registered. She hadn't cried, hadn't raised her voice, hadn't done what people in her position usually did when the room turned against them. She had simply lowered her hand. Slowly, deliberately. The way you set down something valuable not because you're giving it up, but because you're choosing where to put it. The laughter had faded by then. The room had settled back into its rhythms, papers shuffling, phones buzzing softly against the polished table, the low, comfortable hum of men who believed the matter was closed. Who believed, as they always believed, that the silence after humiliation meant acceptance. It didn't. But they wouldn't understand that yet. Whitlock reached for his coffee. His eyes moved briefly, almost imperceptibly back to where she stood. She was gathering her materials. Unhurried. Each document lifted carefully, aligned, stacked with quiet precision, as if she were organizing files in her own office, rather than retreating from a room that had just publicly dismissed her. He watched for 2 seconds longer than he intended, then looked away. Gerald Foss leaned toward Patterson and said something low. A small smile passed between them, the particular smile of men who have expected a certain reaction for so long that its absence feels like a mistake, like a machine that didn't make the sound it was supposed to make. You tap it again, you wait. She gave them nothing. No tears, no stiffness in the jaw, no over-controlled breathing that would betray the effort it cost her to stay composed. She wasn't performing calm. She simply was calm, and that, more than anything, was what made the room feel slightly off balance without knowing why. She picked up the remote, clicked off the presentation. The screen went dark. All those numbers, all that precision, gone in an instant, as if they had never been there, as if the 11 days she had spent building that case simply folded back into silence. She didn't watch the screen go dark. She had already turned away. Her portfolio closed with a clean zip. Final, unhurried. She looked up once, Not at Whitlock, not at Elaine, not at any of the faces arranged carefully around that long, expensive table. She looked at the window, the tall one on the far side of the room, where the afternoon light came through in long, pale strips and fell across the carpet like something that didn't belong to anyone. She looked at it for 3 seconds. Then she walked toward the door. No performance in her steps, no exaggerated steadiness, no visible effort, just movement clean and directional. The walk of someone who knows exactly where she is going even when the room around her has decided she shouldn't be going anywhere at all. Patterson stopped typing. His fingers rested on the keyboard. Suspended, the way a hand pauses before touching something it isn't certain about. He watched her reach the door, watched her push it open, watched it close behind her quietly, without drama. The way a period ends a sentence that doesn't need a raised voice because the meaning is already precise. He stared at the closed door for a moment, then looked back at his screen. But he didn't type anything. Across the table, Elaine Mercer sat very still. Her expression was what it always was in this room, professionally neutral, carefully managed, the mask she had spent 11 years perfecting in spaces like this one. But her pen wasn't moving. Hadn't moved in almost 3 minutes. She was aware of it, chose not to correct it. Whitlock clicked his pen once, twice, set it down on the table. He picked up the next agenda item. Read the heading. Set that down too. His coffee sat at his right hand, untouched now, cooling slowly in the afternoon quiet. Something about the room felt different. Not wrong. Exactly. He wouldn't have used that word, but different the way a room feels after a sound you didn't quite catch. You look up. You see nothing. You go back to what you were doing, but you listened. For a moment. He cleared his throat, turned to Patterson. "The Hargrove numbers," he said. "Let's move." The room obeyed. Voices resumed. Papers turned. The machinery of the afternoon clicked back into motion, smooth and practiced and completely certain of itself. But near the window, where the light still fell in those long, pale strips, the young associate named Darren was looking at the door again. He was 26 years old. He had been in 4 board meetings. He didn't fully understand what he had just witnessed. But something in him, something that hadn't yet been trained out of him, knew that what happened in this room wasn't what it looked like. He picked up his pen, but he didn't write anything about the meeting. He wrote her name, just her name, alone on the margin of the page, small and without context. Then he closed the notebook. Downstairs. The lobby was cool and bright and indifferent. Althea walked through the glass doors without slowing. The city air met her neutral, unhurried, carrying the ordinary noise of an afternoon that didn't know or care what had just happened 30 floors above. She reached into her jacket pocket, pulled out her phone. One message, sent 44 minutes ago, just before she had walked into that room. She hadn't read it then. She read it now. 3 words. Wire confirmed. Proceed. She slid the phone back into her pocket, kept walking. Her face didn't change, but her right hand, the one Whitlock had refused, moved to the strap of her portfolio. Held it. Not tightly, not with visible tension, just with intention, like someone who knows exactly what she's carrying, and exactly where it's going next. The hallway outside the boardroom was the kind of quiet that wasn't really quiet. It had the sounds of a building pretending nothing had happened, the distant hum of the elevator shaft, the soft, mechanical breath of the air system, the faint click of someone's keyboard behind a closed door somewhere down the corridor. Althea walked through it without hurrying. Her heels were measured on the marble floor. 1 step, then another. The kind of walking that doesn't announce itself. The kind that arrives without asking permission. She had almost reached the elevator bank when she heard it. Footsteps. Behind her. Faster than hers. Deliberate. She didn't turn immediately. She waited until the footsteps slowed, until she could hear the slight adjustment in pace that meant whoever it was had found their target and was now deciding how to begin. Then she turned. The woman was in her early 30s. Dark blazer. Low heels. A lanyard tucked halfway into her breast pocket. Her name was Nia Brooks, and Althea recognized her from the periphery of the last 3 meetings, always near the back, always quiet, always holding a tablet she never seemed to type on. Nia stopped a few feet away. She looked down the hall in both directions. A small motion, quick and practiced, the look of someone who had learned to check before speaking in this building. "Ms. Rowan," she said. Her voice was low. Not a whisper. Whispers draw attention. Just low. Althea waited. "I don't have long," Nia said. "I shouldn't be doing this." "Then why are you—" Nia looked at her for a moment. Something moved behind her eyes. Not hesitation. Exactly. More like the expression of someone who has been carrying something heavy for too long and has finally decided to set it down. Consequences be damned. "Because what happened in there wasn't an accident," she said. "And you deserve to know that before you spend another hour thinking it was—" The elevator at the end of the hall opened and closed. No one got out. Nia reached into the inner pocket of her blazer. She pulled out a folded piece of paper, a single sheet, creased twice, the kind of thing you print quickly and carry carefully. She held it out. Althea took it. She unfolded it without breaking eye contact. Then she looked down. It was an internal memo. The header was Hargrove Capital's the same letterhead she had seen on 3 of the documents in today's presentation. The date at the top was 14 days ago, 2 weeks before the meeting. 2 weeks before she had walked into that boardroom and extended her hand and believed, in some corner of her, that the outcome hadn't already been decided. The subject line read, "Rowan Proposal Final Disposition." She didn't read the full body. She didn't need to. 4 lines in. The language was clear enough. Not in alignment with current strategic direction. Recommend rejection at session. Formal presentation to proceed as scheduled for optics. For optics, the meeting had never been a meeting. It had been a stage, a controlled environment designed to produce a specific image, the image of a process that had considered her proposal and found it lacking. The image of fairness, the image of a door that had been open, when in fact the door had been bolted from the inside 2 weeks ago and no one had bothered to tell her. Althea refolded the paper. Her hands were steady. She looked up at Nia. "Who sent this?" "It came from Whitlock's office," Nia said. "But the language, the specific phrasing, that's Kessler. He drafts everything Whitlock signs, has for years. And the board. 3 of them saw it before the meeting. Maybe 4. She paused. Foss definitely saw it. He was the one who suggested the language about optics. Althea said nothing for a moment. The air system hummed. Somewhere down the corridor, a door opened and closed. Normal sounds. Building sounds. The ordinary noise of a machine that ran on certainty and had no reason to believe today was different from any other day. "Why are you telling me this?" Althea asked. Not with suspicion, with precision. She wanted the real answer, not the comfortable one. Nia didn't look away. "Because I've been in this building for 6 years," she said. "And I've watched them do this to 4 other people. 3 of them walked away. 1 of them fought back and lost, because she didn't know what she was walking into." She paused again. "You're different. I can't explain it exactly." But the way you stood in that room—" She stopped herself. "You didn't look like someone who lost," she said finally. "You looked like someone who was waiting." The elevator opened again at the far end of the hall. This time, 2 men stepped out. Suits, purposeful stride. Althea recognized one of them as a member of Whitlock's legal team. Nia straightened immediately. Took a small step back. The lanyard went back into her pocket. Her expression reset, professional, neutral, the face of someone with somewhere to be. "I need to go," she said quietly. "I know," Althea said. Nia turned, walked in the opposite direction without looking back. Her footsteps were even, unhurried, nothing that would draw a second glance from anyone passing through. The 2 men from the elevator walked past without slowing. Althea stood still until they were gone. Then she looked down at the folded paper in her hand. She held it for a moment, not reading it again, just holding it, feeling the weight of it, which was not the weight of paper at all, but the weight of confirmation, of knowing that the thing you suspected was true is, in fact, true, and that the difference between suspicion and certainty is the difference between preparation and war. She slid it into her portfolio, pressed the elevator call button. The light above the door blinked once. The building hummed around her, steady and unaware, the way systems always are just before something inside them begins to break. She came back through the door without knocking. Not aggressively, not with theater. She simply opened it and walked in. The way someone walks into a room they own, and the distinction subtle as it was registered in the bodies of everyone present before their minds had time to process it. The meeting had moved on. Patterson was mid-sentence. Something about Q4 projections, numbers floating in the air above the table like they meant something permanent. Whitlock was leaning back, pen in hand, the posture of a man who had already decided everything worth deciding today. Then the door opened, and Patterson stopped talking. Not because she said anything, not because she made a sound. He stopped because the room changed when she entered it. The way a room changes when the temperature drops 2 degrees, you don't see it. You feel it, and by the time you've registered it, it's already settled into your bones. Whitlock looked up. His expression didn't move, but his pen stopped clicking. "Ms. Rowan." His voice was flat, controlled, the voice of a man who has handled interruptions before and knows exactly how to reduce them. "The meeting is closed." "I know," she said. She walked to the near end of the table, not to her original seat. That chair had already been pushed in, erased as if she had never occupied it. She stood instead, portfolio in hand, calm in a way that was no longer quiet. "I have one question," she said. "Then I'll go." No one told her to leave. That itself was information. She set the portfolio on the table, opened it, removed a single document, not the memo Naya had given her. Something else. Something she had been carrying since before she walked into this building this morning, and placed it face up on the table in front of her. She didn't slide it toward anyone. She just placed it there, visible, and let the room come to it. Kessler leaned forward slightly. His eyes moved to the page. His expression didn't change, but something behind it did a small recalculation, fast and involuntary, the kind your face makes when a number doesn't match what you expected. "I want to ask," Althea said, "who in this room knows where the operating capital for the Meridian account actually comes from?" Silence. Not the comfortable silence of before. Not the silence of men who have already decided and are simply waiting for the room to catch up. This was a different kind, denser, with edges. The silence of people who are suddenly aware that a question has been asked that they do not know the answer to, and that not knowing may matter. Whitlock's voice came back flat and certain. That's not relevant to this discussion. It's the only thing relevant to this discussion, she said. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. The sentence had its own weight, and she let it carry itself. The Meridian account, she continued, holds the primary liquidity buffer for this company's operating cycle. 18 months of runway. Without it, you're looking at a restructuring conversation by February. She paused. I know this because the capital in that account belongs to Rowan Capital Group. It has for 3 years. Quietly, at your predecessor's request. Foss put his pen down. It was a small movement, almost nothing. But in a room where every gesture had meaning, a man like Gerald Foss putting down his pen was the equivalent of someone standing up. $3 billion, Althea said, structured as a silent investment, no board disclosure required under the terms of the original agreement. She looked at Whitlock directly. Which means it can be redirected, under the same terms, without a vote. The room was absolutely still. Patterson had stopped pretending to look at his notes. Kessler's eyes were moving not at her, at the document, reading and rereading the same lines, looking for the exit that wasn't there. Elaine Mercer sat with her hands folded on the table, her expression unreadable. And for the first time in 11 years, she did not look like a woman managing her space carefully. She looked like a woman watching something long overdue finally arrive. Whitlock leaned forward. The practiced ease was still there, the body language of a man who is never lost in a room like this. But something underneath it had shifted. Something structural. Like a building that looks the same from the outside, but has lost something essential in its foundation. And everyone standing inside it can suddenly feel it in the soles of their feet. You're bluffing, he said. She looked at him for a moment. Not with anger, not with satisfaction. With the particular stillness of someone who has already won and is simply waiting for the other person to finish losing. Call your financial team, she said. Ask them about Meridian. She picked up the document, placed it back in her portfolio. Closed it. I'll be outside, she said. Take whatever time you need. She walked to the door, opened it, stepped through. Behind her, before the door swung fully closed, she heard it the sound she had been waiting for since the moment she walked back in. Not an argument. Not Whitlock's voice rising to reclaim the room. Just silence. The deep, total silence of 12 people who no longer knew what they were holding. The door hadn't fully closed before Whitlock spoke. Get Hargrove's legal team on the phone. His voice was the same as always, flat, unhurried, the voice of a man who treats emergencies the way other men treat inconveniences. He didn't look at anyone in particular. He didn't need to. In this room, commands didn't require eye contact. Patterson already had his phone out. Kessler hadn't moved. He was still looking at the space on the table where the document had been, as if it were still there. As if staring long enough at the absence of something could tell you what it had contained. Marcus. Whitlock's voice, quieter now, more precise. Kessler looked up. Tell me what you saw. A pause. Brief, the kind that costs something. The account structure was real, Kessler said. The formatting, the filing reference, the custodian codes, all of it matches. If it's fabricated, someone spent considerable time and money fabricating it. He paused again. I don't think it's fabricated. The room absorbed this. Whitlock nodded once. Not in agreement, in the way a man nods when he is deciding how much of the truth he is willing to acknowledge before building his response around the parts he intends to ignore. It doesn't matter what the document says, he said. "What matters is what we say about it. And right now, we say nothing." He looked around the table slowly. "No calls, no emails, no conversations with anyone outside this room until I speak with counsel. Is that understood?" Heads moved, carefully. The compliance of men who understood that the instruction wasn't really a question. Foss cleared his throat. "Richard, if the account structure is legitimate..." I said nothing. "Gerald?" Foss closed his mouth. Elaine Mercer had been quiet since Althea left the room. She sat with her hands still folded on the table, her expression composed, her eyes moving between Whitlock and the door with the careful attention of someone assembling a picture from its edges inward. "Perhaps," she said, her voice measured and deliberate, "the more productive conversation is about what she actually wants." Whitlock looked at her. "She came back," Elaine continued. "She didn't go to the press. She didn't contact the board externally. She walked back in and asked one question. That's not someone who came to destroy anything." She paused. "That's someone who came to negotiate." "She's not in a position to negotiate," Whitlock said. "She just demonstrated that she is..." The silence that followed was different from the others, harder. The kind that forms when two people in a room understand each other perfectly and have nothing left to say that won't make things worse. Whitlock stood. He walked to the window, stood with his back to the room, looking out at the city the way he always did when he was thinking or when he wanted people to believe he was thinking, which, in his experience, produced the same result. "Set up a meeting," he said finally. "Informal, today if possible. Frame it as a courtesy conversation. Elaine, you handle the outreach." Elaine nodded, made a note. "And I want everything we have on Rowan Capital Group on my desk in 2 hours. Filings, principals, any litigation history, any regulatory contact, everything." Patterson typed something into his phone. "If there's a structural weakness in that account arrangement," Whitlock said, still facing the window, "I want to know about it before she decides to remind us it exists." He turned around. His face was arranged in the expression he used for difficult meetings, open, reasonable, the face of a man who believed in process. It was a good face. He had used it for 30 years, and it had never failed him. "She's one person," he said. "With the document, we are a 40-year institution with 11 board members, 3 law firms, and relationships in this city that were old before she was born." He looked around the table. "We are not threatened. We are managing a situation. There is a difference." No one disagreed. No one agreed either. Outside in the corridor, Althea was standing near the window at the far end of the hall. She wasn't on her phone. She wasn't reviewing documents. She was simply standing, looking out at the city below. Still and unhurried. The way someone waits when they already know what's coming and have no reason to rush it. Her phone buzzed once in her pocket. She looked at the screen. Read the message. Typed 4 words in response. Put the phone away. She had been standing there for 11 minutes when the boardroom door opened and Elaine Mercer stepped into the hallway. Elaine walked toward her. Professional. Composed. The walk of a woman who had been sent to accomplish something and intended to accomplish it gracefully. She stopped a few feet away. "Ms. Rowan," she said. "Mr. Whitlock would like to arrange a conversation. Informal. This afternoon, if your schedule allows." Althea looked at her for a moment. "Tell Mr. Whitlock. I appreciate the offer," she said. "But informal isn't going to work at this stage." Elaine's expression held, barely. "What would work?" Althea reached into her portfolio, removed a single envelope, sealed, clean, no markings on the outside. She held it out. Elaine took it. "He has 48 hours, Althea said. "Everything he needs to know is in there. After that, the decision moves out of his hands." She picked up her portfolio. "Have a good afternoon, Elaine." She walked toward the elevator. Behind her, Elaine stood in the hallway holding the envelope. And for just a moment, one unguarded, unprofessional moment, she looked down at it the way people look at things they don't entirely want to open. Then she turned and walked back toward the boardroom. The hallway was quiet again. But it was a different kind of quiet now, the kind that comes just before something that cannot be undone. The story broke on a Tuesday morning. Not the real story. A version of it shaped, trimmed, and angled in the particular way that stories are shaped when someone with resources decides what the narrative should be before the facts have finished arriving. The headline read, "Rowan Capital Group under review sources. Cite irregularities in Meridian account structure." No byline. Anonymous sources. The kind of article that doesn't need to be true to be effective. By 9:15, it had been shared 1,400 times. By 10, Althea's phone had received calls from 3 partners, 2 attorneys, and a journalist she had never spoken to who somehow already had her direct line. She didn't answer any of them. She sat at the desk in her own office, smaller than Whitlock's, on a floor that didn't have a view of anything impressive, and read the article twice. Carefully. The way you read something written by an enemy, looking not for what it says, but for what it reveals about the person who wrote it. There was a detail in the 3rd paragraph, a reference to internal documents obtained by the publication. Documents that described the Meridian account in terms that were almost accurate, close enough to suggest access. Wrong enough in specific ways to suggest that whoever had provided them had done so deliberately, with something to gain from the distortion. She underlined the sentence, took a photograph of the page with her phone, sent it to one number. Then she went back to work. Across the city, in a glass-walled conference room on the 32nd floor of a different building, 3 men were having a conversation that wasn't being recorded. One of them was a partner at the firm that handled Hargrove Capital's regulatory filings. The second was a communications consultant who had managed reputational crises for 4 Fortune 500 companies and 2 senators. The third was someone whose name didn't appear on any public document connected to this situation, which was precisely why he was there. "The account story buys us a week," the consultant said. "Maybe 10 days if we can get a second outlet to pick it up and add weight." "We need more than 10 days," the first man said. "Then we need more pressure." The consultant leaned back. Something personal, something that makes her the story instead of the money. The third man, who had not spoken yet, looked at his phone, set it face down on the table. "There's a former employee," he said. "Left Rowan Capital 2 years ago under quiet circumstances. She has a grievance. She's been quiet because she was paid to be quiet." He paused. Payment can be reframed. The silence can be made to look like suppression rather than settlement. The room considered this. "Do it carefully," the consultant said. "It's always careful," the third man said. In a coffee shop 4 blocks from Althea's office, Nia Brooks was sitting at a corner table with her laptop open and a cup of tea she hadn't touched. She had been there for an hour. She had read the article, she had read it again, and she had spent the last 40 minutes compiling something she had been compiling quietly, in small pieces, for the past 2 years. Emails, internal memos, meeting notes that should have been deleted but weren't, because the people who wrote them had been certain, for a very long time, that no one would ever think to look. Timestamps, a spreadsheet with names and dates that told a story no single document told alone, but that together formed something undeniable. She saved the file encrypted it, uploaded it to a server that didn't have her name on it. Then she sent Althea a message with a single word. Ready. 2 hours later, in a different part of the city, one of Hargrove Capital's mid-level partners, a woman named Sandra Osei, who had been with the firm for 9 years, received a call from a number she didn't recognize. The voice on the other end was professional, pleasant, and said 3 things with great precision. Her name, the name of a specific internal document she had signed 4 months ago, and the date on which that document had been backdated. She didn't respond. The voice told her she didn't need to respond right now, that there would be time to think. That thinking carefully, at this stage, was in everyone's interest. The call ended. Sandra sat in her car in the parking structure for 6 minutes without moving. Then she called her personal attorney, not the firm's counsel, her own. The request was simple. She wanted to know, hypothetically, what protections existed for someone who came forward with information about internal misconduct at a financial institution. Her attorney asked how serious the misconduct was. Sandra looked through the windshield at the concrete wall in front of her. "Serious enough," she said. "That I've known about it for 4 months and haven't slept well since." Back in her office, Althea was on her second document of the afternoon, a clean, formal letter addressed to the chair of the Financial Oversight Committee. She was not filing it yet. She was reading it the way you read something before it becomes irreversible, checking each sentence for precision and weight. Her assistant knocked once and opened the door. "The second outlet picked up the story," he said. "They're calling it a developing investigation." Althea didn't look up from the letter. "How many sources?" "3, all anonymous." She turned a page. "Good," she said. Her assistant paused. He had worked for her for 4 years, and he had learned, in that time, to trust her silences more than most people's explanations. But this one made him stop. "Good," he said. She looked up then, met his eyes with an expression that wasn't reassurance, and was not worry, and was not quite either of the things it looked like from the outside. "Every move they make," she said, "is a document." He nodded slowly, closed the door. She went back to the letter. Outside, the city moved the way it always moved without knowledge, without judgment. Forward and forward and forward, indifferent to the quiet. Careful war being fought inside its buildings by people whose names it would only learn later, when everything had already been decided. The file Nia sent had no title, just a folder. Inside it, 47 documents arranged in chronological order. The earliest dated 6 years ago, the most recent from 3 weeks before Althea had walked into that boardroom. No explanations, no summary, just the documents themselves, laid out in sequence, the way evidence is laid out when the person assembling it trusts the material to speak without assistance. Althea opened the first one at 7 in the evening. She was still reading at midnight. The documents were not dramatic on their own. That was the thing about systems, they didn't announce themselves. They operated through the accumulation of small, unremarkable decisions, each one defensible in isolation, each one ordinary enough to pass without notice. A memo redirecting a budget line, an HR file closed without resolution, a legal settlement with a confidentiality clause broad enough to cover almost anything, a performance review that appeared in a record 2 weeks after the date printed on it, a loan. Each document was nothing. Together, they were a map. Althea printed the 47th document, laid it on the desk beside the others. She had been arranging them physically for the last 2 hours, spreading them across the surface in a sequence that matched not their dates, but their function. The way each one connected to the next, not through time, but through intent. She stepped back and looked at what she had built. 7 names appeared across the documents with enough frequency to mean something, not as signatories, not always as authors, sometimes just as recipients. Sometimes only in the metadata, a document modified by a username, a file accessed from a specific terminal, a meeting request accepted and then deleted, but not fully erased from the server log. One name appeared more than the others. Not Whitlock, not Kessler, a name she hadn't expected. She picked up that document, read it again slowly. It was a routing slip, the kind of internal form used to move physical files between departments. Unremarkable, the kind of thing that passed through a dozen hands in a normal week and was never looked at twice. But this one had been filed on the same day as a settlement agreement that had never appeared in any board disclosure. And the routing destination, a records office on the building's 4th floor, corresponded to a storage unit that, according to a separate document 2 folders later, had been cleared and decommissioned 8 days after the settlement was signed. The name on the routing slip was Gerald Foss. Althea set the document down. She had known Foss was complicit. She had assumed his role was passive. The nodding compliance of a man who asked no questions because the answers were inconvenient. But passive compliance didn't route documents. Passive compliance didn't coordinate the timing of a file transfer with the destruction of a storage unit 8 days later. Passive compliance didn't plan. She picked up her phone, sent Naya a message. Foss, what do you have on him specifically? The response came 4 minutes later. Another file. Smaller this time, 9 documents, but dense. A thread of communication between Foss and an outside consultant that stretched back 4 years, conducted not through company email, but through a personal account that had been forwarded, at some point, to a firm server by mistake. 1 forwarded email, 1 mistake. And inside it, the kind of language that people use when they believe no one is watching: direct, specific, and completely without the careful ambiguity of official correspondence. 1 line in a message dated 22 months ago read, if she files, we use the Carver approach. Worked in 2019. Will work again. Althea read the line twice. Then she opened a separate folder on her laptop and searched for the name Carver. It took her 9 minutes. In 2019, a woman named Denise Carver had been a senior analyst at a mid-sized investment firm with structural ties to Hargrove Capital. She had raised internal concerns about account irregularities. 3 weeks later, a story had appeared in a trade publication describing her as the subject of an internal ethics review. The review was never confirmed. The story cited anonymous sources. Carver had resigned 4 months after the article appeared. She had signed a settlement agreement. The confidentiality clause was 11 pages long. Althea sat with that for a moment. Then she opened a new document on her laptop, typed a name, an address, a phone number she had found in the 3rd folder Nia had sent, listed without context in what appeared to be a personal contacts export, the kind of file that ends up where it shouldn't when someone cleans out a hard drive carelessly. Denise Carver, Chicago, a number with a 312 area code. She didn't call it tonight, but she wrote it down, added it to the physical file on her desk, placed it in the sequence she had been building, not at the end, but near the center, where it connected outward in 4 directions at once. She stood back again and looked at the full spread of documents on her desk. 47 pieces of paper, 7 names, 1 thread running through all of it, invisible until you laid everything flat and stepped far enough back to see the shape it made. She had 1 document left to place. She picked it up, the routing slip with Foss's name. She set it at the top of the arrangement, where the sequence began, where the first decision had been made that had made all the others possible. She looked at it for a long moment. Then she took out her phone and photographed the entire desk. The whole arrangement, every document, every connection, the full map of what had been done and who had done it, and how long they had believed it would never be seen. She sent the photograph to one address, her attorney's personal email. Subject line: "For the record, do not open until I say." She closed her laptop, turned off the desk lamp, sat in the dark for a moment with the city light coming through the window, pale and indifferent. The documents were still there on the desk, patient, precise, waiting. The letter arrived on a Thursday morning. Official letterhead, federal seal, the kind of envelope that sits on a desk and changes the atmosphere of a room before it's even opened. Althea's assistant brought it in without a word and set it in front of her the way you set down something you aren't sure about, carefully, with distance. She opened it, read it once, then again. It was a notification of preliminary inquiry, Rowan Capital Group, named as a subject of interest in a federal review of undisclosed investment structures, signed by someone whose title she recognized, whose office she had called twice in the past 3 years on unrelated matters. She set it down, picked up her phone, called her attorney. "I'm looking at it now," she said when he answered. "Tell me what you see." A pause on his end, the sound of papers. Then, carefully, "The formatting is correct. The seal looks right. But the case reference number in the header, I've never seen that prefix before. And the signature block is missing the standard CC line." Another pause. "This didn't come from that office," he said. She had already known that, but she needed him to say it, needed it on record, in a phone call, with a timestamp. "Document everything," she said. "I'll send you the envelope by courier this afternoon." She hung up, set the letter aside, went back to work. By noon. A second story had appeared, this one not in a trade publication but in a general interest outlet, with a significantly larger readership. The headline was careful, legally careful. It didn't make accusations. It asked questions. Questions about the origins of Rowan Capital Group's early funding. Questions about a business relationship in 2014 that Althea had disclosed in every relevant filing she had ever submitted. Described here in language engineered to make disclosure sound like concealment. Her phone started moving differently after that. Not the calls she expected: partners, attorneys, people with direct stakes. Different calls. A former colleague she hadn't spoken to in 2 years. A board contact from a non-profit she sat on. Her sister, who didn't follow financial news and had no reason to know anything about this, calling from a number Althea didn't have saved. "Someone called Marcus," her sister said. "He said he was a journalist. He said he was doing a story and wanted to ask about your background, about where you grew up." Althea was quiet for a moment. "What did you tell him?" "Nothing." I hung up. A pause. "Althea, what's happening?" "I'll call you tonight," she said. "Don't speak to anyone. Not about me, not about the family, not about anything. If someone calls again, get a name and number and send it to me." She ended the call, sat still for exactly 30 seconds. Then she opened her laptop and began drafting the third letter in a sequence she had been preparing for 11 days. Outside her building that afternoon, there were people, not many, 7, maybe 8, holding printed signs with her photograph on them, her photograph, taken from a professional profile, cropped and reprinted with text beneath it she hadn't written. The signs used words like accountability and transparency. Words that meant nothing specific and everything general. Words designed to photograph well and explain nothing. A camera crew from a local affiliate was already there when she left the building. She walked past without stopping, without looking at the signs, without adjusting her pace or her expression. Her attorney walked beside her. saying nothing, because they had discussed this scenario and the agreement was simple nothing, to no one, under any circumstances, until they were ready. A man stepped toward her from the small crowd, mid-30s, agitated in the practiced way of someone who had been coached to appear spontaneous. "Ms. Rowan," his voice was loud enough for the camera. "Do you have a response to the federal inquiry?" She kept walking. "Ms. Rowan, the public deserves to know." Her attorney placed a hand briefly on her arm. Not to stop her, just to confirm she wasn't stopping. She didn't stop. Inside the car. The door closed. The sound from outside became distant, muffled, reduced to the ordinary noise of a city that didn't know what it was being used for. She looked straight ahead. Her attorney turned to her. "They're escalating faster than we expected." "Yes," she said. "The fake federal letter, that's a serious move. That's not just reputation management. That's someone who's decided the normal tools aren't enough." "I know. Which means they know what you have." She looked at him then. "Or they know what they did," she said. "And they're finally afraid of it." He was quiet for a moment. "Are you ready for tomorrow?" She turned back to the window. The city moved past in its usual way, unhurried, enormous, indifferent to the small and consequential things happening inside its buildings and its cars and its carefully worded documents. "I've been ready," she said, "since the day they decided not to shake my hand." Her attorney nodded, opened his briefcase, removed a folder he had been carrying for 4 days without opening in front of anyone. He opened it now. Inside were 12 documents, clean copies, organized in the sequence she had specified, every page numbered, every exhibit labeled, everything exactly where it needed to be. Tomorrow. It would stop being preparation. Tomorrow. It would become something that could not be undone. The hearing room was smaller than she had expected. Wood paneling, fluorescent light, a long table at the front where 5 committee members sat with water glasses and printed agendas, and the particular expression of people who had agreed to be present without yet knowing what presence would cost them today. A gallery of seats behind the bar, half filled. Reporters in 2 rows on the left. Several faces she recognized. Several she didn't. Whitlock sat at the respondent's table with 2 attorneys flanking him. He was dressed the same way he always dressed, dark suit, no tie, the studied casualness of a man who wanted to communicate that nothing about this room intimidated him. He held a pen, clicked it once when she entered. She took her seat at the table across from him. Didn't look at him. Opened her folder. The committee chair called the session to order at 9:02. Standard language. Procedural framing. The kind of opening that is designed to make what follows feel routine, contained, manageable. Althea had heard it before in smaller rooms. She let it pass. When it was her turn to present, she stood. She didn't use notes. She began with the memo, the one dated 14 days before the boardroom meeting, the one that used the word optics to describe a process designed to appear fair while being the opposite of fair. She read the relevant section aloud. Slowly. Then she placed the document on the table and slid a copy toward the committee. One of the members leaned forward to read it, then sat back. She moved to the second exhibit, the routing slip with Foss's name, the timeline connecting it to the storage unit decommissioned 8 days after the settlement was signed. She didn't explain the connection out loud. She placed the documents side by side and let the dates speak. Let the room do the arithmetic. It didn't take long. The third exhibit was the email thread, the one containing the line about the Carver approach. She read that line once, clearly, without emphasis, The way you read something that doesn't need emphasis because the words are sufficient. Then she placed Denise Carver's signed statement beside it, obtained 2 weeks ago. Voluntary, notarized, describing in precise detail what the Carver approach had looked like from the inside. One of the reporters in the second row stopped typing and looked up. Whitlock's lead attorney leaned toward him and said something. Whitlock shook his head slightly. A small motion, almost imperceptible, but not imperceptible enough. The fourth exhibit was the fabricated federal letter. Althea placed it on the table alongside the authentication analysis her attorney had commissioned, 3 pages. Technical, unambiguous in its conclusion. She placed beside those the courier receipt showing the letter had originated not from a federal office, but from a private mailing center 2 blocks from Hargrove Capital's headquarters. The room had been quiet before. It was quieter now. The committee chair asked Whitlock's counsel if they wished to respond to Exhibits 1 through 4 before proceeding. The attorney said they reserved the right to respond in full following the complete presentation. The chair nodded. Althea reached into her folder for the last time. She removed a small device, a standard digital recorder, the kind available in any electronics store, unremarkable in every way. She placed it on the table, connected a cable to the room's audio system. Her attorney had arranged this with the committee clerk the previous afternoon, all properly documented, all within procedure. She pressed play. Whitlock's voice filled the room. She had recorded it in the hallway outside the boardroom 11 days ago, through the door that had not been fully closed when she walked away. She had not planned it. She had simply had the recorder in her portfolio, had carried it for weeks as a habit, a practice she had developed early in her career, in rooms where she was often the only person present who would later dispute what had been said. The recording was 43 seconds long. In it, Whitlock's voice was clear and unhurried, the voice of a man speaking to people he trusted completely, in a space he believed was sealed. He said 5 things in those 43 seconds. Each one was a problem on its own. Together they were not a problem. Together they were a confession. When the recording ended, the room did not react immediately. That was the thing about silence in official spaces, it had weight. And this one had more than most. It sat on the room for a full 4 seconds before anyone moved, before a pen touched paper or a chair shifted or a throat cleared. Whitlock put his pen down, not dramatically, not with the gesture of a man conceding, just set it down, flat on the table, and did not pick it up again. His lead attorney was writing something, fast, the handwriting of someone building a wall in real time, knowing it won't hold but building it anyway because building is the only thing left to do. Althea sat down, folded her hands on the table in front of her. The committee chair asked if she had additional exhibits. "No," she said. "That's everything." One of the committee members, a woman on the far left who had not spoken since the session opened, looked at Whitlock for a long moment. Then she looked at Althea. Then she wrote something in the margin of her printed agenda, slowly and deliberately. The way you write something you intend to remember. She capped her pen. Whitlock's attorney began to speak. Objections, framings, procedural challenges, the language of a defense that knew it wasn't defending anymore, but needed to be seen attempting it. The words moved through the room and settled nowhere. The committee chair listened without expression, then looked at the recorder still sitting on the table. Althea followed his gaze. The recorder sat there small, plastic, ordinary, the kind of object no one would look at twice in any other context. In this room, at this moment, it was the most significant thing on the table. She reached out and picked it up, held it for a moment in her right hand, the same hand Whitlock had refused. She placed it carefully back in her portfolio. closed the clasp. Across the table. Whitlock was looking at her for the first time since the session had begun. His expression was not anger. Not yet. It was the expression of a man encountering something he had no category for, a situation that had moved entirely outside the boundaries of his experience, into territory where his tools did not work, and his certainty had no ground to stand on. She met his eyes, held them for exactly 3 seconds. Then she looked away. She had nothing left to prove in this room. The work was done. Outside the building, a maintenance worker extended his hand. She shook it. No hesitation. No room full of watching eyes. No one deciding whether the moment was appropriate. Just 2 people, a handshake, and the quiet morning air moving between them like it had always been free. She walked to her car, opened the folder on the back seat, redirected the wire. $3 billion. Moved by morning. Some rooms decide who matters before anyone walks in. They just forget power doesn't always announce itself. Sometimes it waits. This story is based on real patterns inside real systems. The names were changed. The silence wasn't. If you've ever been in a room that made its decision before you opened your mouth, you already know how this ends. The only question is what you do next.